broadcast, TrueFire Live. You're watching and listening to one of my personal favorite cats to work with, Sean McGowan. Sean's done 4 projects already with TrueFire, and he's relatively new artist. Just welcome him to the family, I believe, last year. Sean's done fingerstyle jazz guitar course, a walking bass and comping course, a creative jazz comping course, a pentatonic palex course, and check them out on TrueFire. They're all 5-star across the board, 5-star ratings from students, lots of great comments, great feedback, and he's returned this week to do 2 more projects. One of them called View of the Blues, and the other one, Trading Solos. We'll talk to Sean about both of those, but I want to read you a couple of quotes about this guy. He's crazy good on guitars, I think you can already tell. His signature style is kind of this fingerstyle jazz, but a very contemporary approach to it. We'll talk to Sean a little bit about that in a minute. But, he plays a ton of festivals. He's the assistant professor of music and the guitar program director at the University of Colorado in Denver. Awesome educational facility. But check out these quotes. This from Tuck Andrus of Tuck and Patty. Sean McGowan is the most promising young solo artist I have ever heard. His first CD, River Coffee, paints a broad, beautiful picture of his enormous virtuosity, unrelenting musicality, playful sense of humor, and remarkable knowledge of musical histories. I love this part. Guitarists will weep yet laugh with delight as they try to figure out what he is doing, and history will remember Sean as one of the most important guitarists of his generation. Just Jazz Guitar magazine said, really stunning. A non-guitarist will never realize just how much is going on, but we guitarists will constantly ask ourselves, how did he do that? I know I've asked myself 100 times in session here with him. And then All About Jazz said, playing the blues standards or bebop anthems, fiery 16th note lines, or suspended harmonic constructs, Sean McGowan has found his niche amongst the best jazz guitar soloists. Let's talk to Sean. Great outro, beautiful timing.
Thanks, Brad.
Man, we've only just started working on your library already. The 4 you have already published here, 5-star across the board, a rarity. I'll say that. How do you feel about that?
It makes me feel so good. It's wonderful to be a part of this family and this team. I just love what you're doing here at TrueFire. But yeah, I'm very honored to be able to share my experiences and knowledge in a variety of contexts in these courses. It's pretty awesome, and I really appreciate you and the team for giving me the flexibility and the freedom to kind of do what I want topic-wise. I never felt like anything was streamlined in a very, tight way. I really appreciate that you give all the artists free reins and creatively.
Absolutely. I mean, and we certainly appreciate you and what you bring to the table. It's rare. It really is rare. You have players that are just magnificent players, but maybe don't have the teaching skills to make the lessons really, really accessible. Mm-hmm. Not that there's anything wrong with it, because we love to hear every artist's perspective on how they hear music. I mean, imagine Wes Montgomery explaining, how he did what he did. Might not be technical, might not even use the word theory or harmony or modes, but it's a really refreshing perspective, and there's learning in that as well. But in your case, you really are able to take some very sophisticated topics and make them accessible for mere mortal players, right? And at the same time, you're a crazy player, man. What you do just kind of blows my mind. So you're like at the top of the game on the artist side, and a professor of music as well.
Right, right.
You
Well,
know.
thank you. I appreciate that. I
And
love
how
sharing
old are you?
knowledge.
You're 18 years older.
Yeah, I'm 19, going on 20.
You probably get carded at clubs still.
I live
Um,
in Colorado. No one gets carded for anything.
let that's probably true. Um, how did how did your passion, I guess, for education, what sparked that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been teaching guitar lessons since I was in high school. Initially, it was a great way to make money, in addition to working at the pizza joint convenience store,
Hmm.
chopping onions for $4 an hour or whatever it was. And I thought, wow, this is a lot better. Much rather teach guitar. And I always enjoy doing that. I just really enjoy the process of sharing knowledge with another person, but also the process of learning something twice, as they say, right? When you teach, you have to learn it twice.
Right.
And being able to understand it in a way that I could communicate it and articulate it clearly
Yeah.
with the student, regardless of their age or playing ability or musical background, just to be able to share knowledge and have it make an impact on their playing and their musical development. To me, that's just as rewarding as the most exciting gig in the world,
Well, it's funny that you say that, because we've heard, I don't know, we've done a lot of sessions here, and it's not uncommon to hear an artist come in and say, you know what, I had no idea really what I was doing until I analyzed what I was doing.
Yeah.
Made me understand it better so that I could explain it better. So education really does help to move one's art form forward.
Absolutely. I mean, I think if we're talking about any great player or any great artist in any medium, any genre of music or any medium in art, they have to go through that process of really understanding what makes them work and their own signature voice and all of those things that make up an art form, whether it's explicitly or implicitly. But everyone goes through that deep, inquiry and that deep, hitting the road and asking those deep questions. And I think when you teach and you make it a point of your life to share knowledge with other people and help them on their way, I think that's a really beautiful thing, and it only reinforces musical concepts to you as well, as the teacher.
You have to. We're going to talk about these two projects you've done this week, which everybody's really excited about, and I guess a barometer for us is how many times people here at TrueFire find excuses to come into the control room, for just to kind of listen into what's happening. You've had a whole crowd in there this week. But first, we started with, like, your signature thing is this solo jazz fingerstyle guitar. And for those people chiming into this broadcast, and for those people that'll chime into the on-demand version, just play something. You did a little solo thing with All Blues.
Yeah.
I'm throwing you a bit of a curveball.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's
just
good.
play a solo fingerstyle jazz piece for us.
Sure, a little short something sweet. Hopefully sweet. Thanks.
In fact, I have to read a little comment here. Your signature thing is just one of the most difficult types of guitar playing. It's funny that he says that because it is, okay? And when Sean first came in, that's what we focused on. That walking bass lines thing was awesome. The finger-style jazz was awesome. And as we contemplated where we would go together,
Right.
And we see, together we look out 5 years. What is this library, Sean McGowan's library, going to look like here at TrueFire? And where do all the various paths ultimately lead, the library making sense. And, we felt, hey, for the next couple, 3-4 courses, let's work with more traditional forms of playing. And we just spoke a couple minutes ago about how we can start to teach the fingerstyle jazz thing to get, people used to a pick starting to embrace that style.
Right.
And there's a way to get there, isn't there?
Absolutely. I still am primarily a pick player because around Denver and around Colorado and when I travel, I'm doing a lot of gigs, pickup gigs with various bands. So I would say, at least 60% of what I'm doing is in an ensemble situation, playing in a very traditional way with a pick. For me, over the years, I love playing solo guitar, and I feel more connected to the instrument when I'm playing with my fingers. So for me, it's a lot easier to play multiple parts and counterpoint and things like that using my fingers than with a pick, although some people do it with a pick. But in most group settings, I'll always play with a pick. And so I think that's just a part of functioning in any real musical situation. So I haven't neglected that at all. And it's really important for gigging guitar players to have access to language that we're going to be talking about in these new courses, which is primarily blues and language for solo language and comping language for standards.
And correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm often wrong, as the team here at TrueFire will testify
Never.
to. Okay. But you could do it live on camera. But everything that you cover in all the, let's call it the pick-based courses, is also applicable to what you're going to need to know and play when you're a fingerstyle player.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the knowledge is the same. I think what you need to do primarily is just make a technical adjustment, and that's what I had to do. And believe me, I'd been playing with a pick for many years before I made the commitment to go fingerstyle, and ultimately that's on your first gig that you decide to do without a pick, because it's very much a security blanket or a crutch to lean on. So I think once you make that commitment, a lot of practicing, of course, but it's really kind of figuring out how you interact technically with the guitar. For example, whether you choose to have nails or not. I don't, by the way. I get that question a lot. I don't have any fingernails. What kind of guitar you choose to play, whether you've had any classical guitar training, and if so, does that impact your approach to fingerstyle jazz? All of those questions, all of those issues that you kind of need to work out as you're making the transition from a pick player to fingerstyle.
Cool. So, as I said, there's a couple of great fingerstyle jazz courses already in the library. I assure everybody we will get there. We'll have, when Sean first came in, we wanted to kind of show off what his thing really was all about. Admittedly, some of the stuff might be a little advanced. There's still a lot of stuff you can learn from it. But now we're on track to developing, let's call it a jazz vocabulary, harmony, theoretical, creative approaches, some of the lines. And over the next couple of sessions, we'll be working on some of these fingerstyle techniques to help you get into that space. But let's talk about what we did this week.
Yeah.
I love we did a trading solos, and most of our students are familiar and really dig these trading solos courses.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that in a minute. But I love this Views of the Blues course, where you talk about Charlie Christian, Kenny Burrell, Wes Montgomery, Grant Green. And tell us in your mind why this is kind of an important, let's say, learning experience.
Yeah.
And why you think the blues in particular is rooted, or jazz is rooted to the blues, and how these guys help to establish that vocabulary.
Definitely. So just to back up for a minute, I think that jazz can be a loaded term to some guitar players. It can feel off-putting almost. It's intimidating, and I don't want to play. I don't like jazz. It's whether they're thinking it sounds too cheesy or cocktail loungy or anything. And just just keep in mind that jazz has tons of subgenres and artists and time periods, and there's plenty of jazz that I can't stand listening to. So it's like with any genre. If you could take rock or blues, there are the artists that you love and really connect with, and there are those that don't at all. I mean, that's true of any genre. So it's unfair to be intimidated or say that you don't like a particular genre. And I think for guitar players especially, a great way to kind of get their foot into the pool, get their feet wet, is by listening to these guitarists that you just mentioned that are covered in this 3 Views class. All of those aforementioned guitar players were huge influences, not only on jazz guitarists, but rock guitar players. Jimi Hendrix was a huge fan of Kenny Burrell. He was quoted as saying, if he could just get Kenny Burrell's sound, Stevie Ray Vaughan was a huge fan of Wes Montgomery's, as well as Grant Green especially. He would pay tribute to Grant Green on different recordings and certainly live in concert, and Kenny. And Eric Johnson is a huge fan of Wes Montgomery. Wes is his favorite guitar player. So they've impacted and influenced guitar players far outside the boundary of jazz, if you will. But it's a great way to understand the basic blues language from a different perspective. And that was the idea behind this course, is what if we take a form that we all know, that we all grew up with, and it's very much a common language that we all speak, 12-bar blues, that standard form, and all of the variations. And because regardless of where you go in the country and even in the world, everybody knows how to play a blues, or should be able to on some level. And the more I think about it, and the more I've studied, 20th century American music history and culture, the regional differences in the blues are amazing. They're all speaking the same language, but with a different dialect. And so Wes Montgomery, Grant Green, and Kenny Burrell are 3 of my all-time favorite jazz guitarists who are adept in all styles and did much more, but that root that holds them together and their playing together is not only their ability to play blues, they're all deeply rooted in blues, but also their connection to Charlie Christian, who of course influenced every electric guitar player after him, not only jazz guitarists, but everyone. And to me, Grant Green and Kenny Burrell and Wes Montgomery represent the next generation. They're part of that post-Charlie Christian movement. And I thought it would be really cool to just explore the blues from the various perspectives of those 3 players, and then ultimately how they connected their styles to the blues as well as Charlie Christian's, and then ultimately came up with their own styles, because I think that's what a lot of people are looking for. How do I get my own voice? How do I create my own language, my own way of conceptualizing and expressing something? And I think Kenny Burrell, Wes Montgomery, and Grant are all perfect examples, because they all have their own unique voices, but yet you can tie them directly to Charlie Christian's approach.
Yeah, he's kind of like the initial spark of this whole
Yeah, he really is
thing,
the figurehead,
right?
for sure.
And what's interesting, first of all, what's great about you is you are, and, there's lots of testimony about that as well. You're a music history buff, guitaristically speaking.
I'm a super
for sure.
nerd. Yeah, I just love
And
it.
so, we always trip out here on how cool would it be to have a Charlie Christian or Kenny Burrell. And I'm still trying to get Kenny, by the way. He's halfway there, okay? But I mean, these players to have a TrueFire project so that you can hear it right. The next best thing is to get someone like yourself who has studied those styles and can kind of pass that on. Let's start with Charlie Christian.
Okay, let me do a quick guitar change, if that's cool, Tommy, because I feel one of our goals in this course is to also talk about the tools that each of those players use to capture their sound. So there's a little bit of gear talk and guitars.
I don't think you'll have any complaints from your listening and
Yeah.
watching audience. While you're doing this, let me tell you that right now, live, we have fans from Michigan, Pennsylvania, Poland, Denmark, Italy, California, Ohio, India. Wonder what time it is in India. It's got to be, what, middle of the night? Or
Tomorrow, I was going to guess.
tomorrow? We also have Colorado. I guess you have a friend or family in Colorado
All right.
also tuned in. Vancouver, which is one of my favorite places on the planet, and
Indeed.
Canada. Let's see, Seattle, Boston, New Jersey, Finland. So, you know, a lot of time zones, a lot of jazz fans, a lot of Sean McGowan fans.
Hope you're not getting in trouble if you're at work, by the way.
There's probably a few,
Close the door,
you
yeah.
know, sneaking in with the headphones on, you know, covering the screen. Nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah, no, man.
Okay, you've changed guitars.
Yeah.
Charlie Christian.
So I think, you know, one of the things that we talk about in addition to musical and technical approaches is how they used various tools to achieve their sound. So I think all of these players had this vision of the sound that they wanted to create, and then ultimately, you know, settled on a particular guitar style and amp style that was available to them at the time to really reinforce their concept of sound. So with Charlie Christian, it was important to have a box, you know, a nice 16 or 17-inch guitar with flat wound strings and played through a very clean amp. So the only effect that we're using per se is a nice spring reverb that we have going on here. But maybe I'll just play a little excerpt of one of the tracks that we cover in the course. And this is from a tune that he recorded with the Benny Goodman Sextet. And it's a great illustration of his amazing style and the way he approached blues.
So,
This gives you a little taste of what we're doing.
yeah, what's interesting to us, of course, and probably other folks, is there's a couple of moves and lines in there that are still very fresh.
Oh,
and still
absolutely.
very much of the vocabulary of, you know, even the most contemporary progressive blues players.
Yeah.
So talk to that.
Yeah, that's definitely what we talk about in the course, and that there's a lot of language that maybe over the years has been overlooked that really stands up. And I think initially it comes with this perspective of the blues that has maybe been forgotten by a lot of, you know, when a lot of people, when they play blues, they maybe only think of Chicago blues or the way that B.B. King or Buddy Guy might play, or maybe Texas blues, and maybe that would even, you know, expand into acoustic blues if you're into you know, Blind Lemon Jefferson or Robert Johnson or any of the Piedmont players, but even those are just kind of a small piece of this picture of what is the blues. And I think for Charlie Christian, because he was from Texas, Oklahoma City, traveled in a bunch of bands throughout the Southwest, at a time where blues was very much an integral part of jazz. It was kind of a response to the syrupy commercial jazz that was happening, you know, in New York in the 20s and all of those big ballroom dances. A lot of those musicians moved out west to Kansas City, and there was a great swing jazz blues scene, and it's very close to Western swing music. A lot of those musicians jammed. You know, Charlie Christian knew Eldon Shamblin, and also T-Bone Walker. So all of these people that were kind of figureheads of what we now compartmentalize in different genres basically speaking the same language. You know, Eldon was doing it with Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys, and Charlie Christian was doing it in various pickup bands and Benny Goodman's sextet, and, you know, T-Bone Walker was playing in other bands on the West Coast. But it's ultimately the same language, and it's just a different way of accessing these shapes. So if we're starting out in B flat, this tune, just even within that box, instead of feeling restricted to only playing minor pentatonic or minor blues, there are all of these other options and colors available. And what a lot of these players in this course would do, they would play blues vocabulary, but also play vocabulary that would be typical of bebop and post-bop, and really honing in on the chord changes. So just, you know, right off with that first lick, it's a great opening statement to, you know, to a solo. I think Jim Hall actually wrote in his book, Exploring Jazz Guitar, that he loved Charlie Christian specifically for that. It was like, if you're going to read a great novel, you have to be hooked in that first sentence, or it's gone, you know? And Charlie Christian had that ability. Yeah. It just was spontaneous. Everything, as soon as he started playing, that magic started happening.
Yeah. So the next artist you covered was Kenny, right?
Yeah, yeah. So Kenny Burrell would talk about his two primary guitar influences as being Charlie Christian, of course, and Oscar Moore, and really going for a real full, rich sound. And I think, you know, along with horn players, Charlie Christian was a big inspiration to Kenny Burrell for his single note clarity and ability to come up with these just seemingly never-ending riffs and lines with this heavy concept. And I think Oscar Moore inspired him with the elegance of his chordal playing. Of course, Oscar Moore played in the Nat King Cole Trio for a while, and just a very beautiful chordal player from Texas. And so he was also a very adept blues player and had this sophisticated harmonic language. So they could hang in both worlds. They could play really nice blues, and they could swing, but they could also play real lush ballads. And Kenny Burrell, coming from Detroit, I think was also influenced by his classical guitar training. He studied classical guitar, and just by hanging out and playing with all these great Detroit musicians, Paul Chambers, certainly Tommy Flanagan, and that clarity and approach to jazz really impacted him. So he's an exciting person to check out, and his musical breadth is so wide, you could do a library of courses just on Kenny Burrell, but we're just kind of getting a glimpse into his style and how he took some of these elements. So let's maybe check out a little excerpt of one of his tunes. This is from his classic Midnight Blue record. And one of the cool things about this course is that we show licks and concepts. I should say, more importantly, concepts, but those are articulated with licks and lines that you can use in your own playing. But then each player has two really long etudes that you can dig in deep and you know, really take a good solid look at what they're doing. So this tune,
Sean,
oh,
do us a favor. Mm-hmm. And show us a couple, because the way you present it in the course is you'll show the concepts,
right,
show a lick or two, and then you'll give us an etude, a performance study that applies those concepts and those lines.
Sure.
Present it like you do in the course so they can get a taste of what you've done.
Okay, so if we start off with a short lick or a concept and say, okay, one of the things that Kenny Burrell does in this particular song that's a great thing that you can utilize in your solos is creating a dialogue with yourself, almost like a question and answer approach. And you can do that in two ways. You can create one lick or one line that's your question, your antecedent, and then answer that with another lick. In this song, Kenny Burrell answers that with a little chord progression. So he starts off with this box that's very familiar to all of us, just the C minor pentatonic. And then he answers that with a little chord. So he starts off. So it's almost like he's creating a little conversation with himself. And of course, with his amazing technique, he would really, you know, bring out those strong lines, just, you know, and then the chord answer is very soft. So it almost sounds like there are two guitar players. One's just doing a soft comp in the background, and I just love this approach. It's really beautiful. He's taking very simple material in terms of just this scale, with a few different variations, but that's the scale that we all grew up with. And it's almost like, wow, how far can you go? How deep can you go with that language? And the answer is in rhythm and in phrasing and in line scapes. So, do you want to play a little bit of this track?
Please.
Check it out?
Yeah.
All right. That.
Killer. So, that's how Sean has organized the curriculum for this course. There are sections for each one of the players. Then Sean will share some lines or licks.
Yeah.
Some
each
of
player
the
has
concepts.
5 licks, 5 concepts.
Right.
And then those culminate in 2 longer studies, longer etudes. So plenty to work on.
Plenty. I guarantee.
All good stuff.
That's guaranteed, okay?
Yeah.
No shortage. It'll keep you in the shed for quite a while, okay? Meanwhile, what's awesome about that, and to the point that you made earlier, is every one of our favorite blues players today, every single one of them has been here. They went back and studied these lines from these players and just made them a part of their own language, twisted them, made them their own. But it's really the same vocabulary, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Just different dialects, different tweaks.
Right.
But this is where the vocabulary was, originated from, these players. Let's do Wes.
All right, let's talk about Wes. So, yeah, I mean, everything that you said, you're really hitting the nail on the head. And what's cool about a course like this is that you can actually take all of these different solos and excerpts and say, hey, for example, they all do, in all of their solos that we talk about in this course, they all do some variation of, we all know that lick, but it's the ways in which they phrase it and permutate it and do variations from that. And I think that one concept alone of many will give you lots of ideas to expand your own playing. A lot of times people will complain about playing the same thing over and over again, getting into a rut. So there's that vocabulary. Of course, there are the technical differences between each player, and Wes being very unique in that he articulated, as you know, everything with a thumb. He didn't use a pick. So we talk about octaves, and we talk about playing block chords and soloing with block chords, as Wes did, but we'll give you a little taste of one of the etudes in here. And I'm going to play this. I can play octaves with my thumb, but to get that kind of real rich, fat sound, I use my fingers just to get the sound of flesh on flat wound string. So I'll be doing that until we get to octaves. But let's check out a little bit of this etude called the Gulf Coast Blues.
Deal.
included that. Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Hey, there's a bonus move for
Yeah,
you, you know?
yeah.
The, you know, so clear, right? You talked before about Stevie Ray, you being influenced by Wes, and you hear a lot of octave work by Stevie Ray, and boom, there it is, right? Comes from there. So, being the history buff that you are, do you know why Wes developed the thumb technique?
Well, he stated in interviews that a variety of reasons that he started off playing that way because he wanted to play quietly late at night. He had a family at a very young age, and he didn't want to disturb his family sleeping or his neighbors. Yeah, that's one of the stories. But I think that, you know, I have to wonder in my own mind. I think that maybe he started off that way because in those days, no one told those people, you have to do it this way.
Right.
You know, a lot of them, by default, figured out their own way, which is a beautiful thing that we have to really remember to do in these days when everything's handed to you. But I think he just felt more connected to the guitar using his thumb, and I identify with that by being a fingerstyle player. And by the time, you know, he just got so far that every time he would try to use a flat pick, it just was really frustrating and got in the way. So he decided, forget about it. A couple of things to note about him physically was that he was double jointed. So they said that his thumb would just bend back, you know, to his wrist. And over time, he developed, you know, a callus on the side of his thumb, just as you would on your left hand. So he had this kind of little ridge, and that allowed him to get that same clarity of articulation that a pick would. So it worked for him, and that sound is immediately apparent. But yeah, it's true, you know, even if you're Stevie Ray or Eric Johnson playing on a Strat, as soon as you go into an octave playing with your thumb, that, you know, people immediately think, oh, Wes.
Wes Montgomery.
Yeah.
Right? And then after Wes, you wind up the course with Grant Green.
Grant Green.
Another monster everybody talks about. Everybody was influenced by.
Yeah. All right, I have to switch guitars real quick because I really want to hone in on that particular tone. But yeah, to speak to what you're saying, Brad, Grant was a great player. I mean, I think he's enjoying maybe a little bit of a rebirth now, ironically. I mean, I think with Kenny and Wes, all of these players impacted the musical world beyond jazz. You know, Wes was a hugely successful commercial star in pop music. You know, people had Wes records that didn't listen to jazz, you know, his later recordings, and Kenny did so many things. The interesting thing about Grant Green is that at one point, he was one of the most sampled artists among hip-hop DJs. That especially his late 60s, early 70s work, that's kind of like the acid jazz, the funk stuff, that you listen to a lot of rap and hip-hop records, and they're Grant Green tunes. I mean, everybody has sampled his stuff. So there's that side of him. He made, you know, gospel recordings and Latin recordings and just an amazingly clear voice, but there was a book that was written called The Forgotten Genius of Jazz Guitar that I recommend everybody check out. But I think he felt that he didn't really achieve the same level of commercial success as others. So it's nice to hear that, or to see that, you know, he is being recognized. But of course, players such as Stevie Ray Vaughan and you know, people that really know lots of different styles of blues, they've been hip to Grant Green for quite a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so let's just get a little taste of what Grant might do in an organ trio setting over a minor blues progression. So one of the other things that I really love about this course is not only do we talk about different players and their individual approaches and styles, but also different forms of the blues. We do blues in 3/4, 24-bar blues, we do minor blues, we do a standard blues, we do bird blues. So each of those playing styles are expressed through different forms of the blues, so you can learn about different styles of the blues instead of just everything being 12-bar blues with the same chords. All right, let's check out some minor blues. Oh, sorry, that was the wrong track. Do you have that minor blues right there, by any chance? We can stall. All right, let's check it out. I could talk for days about Grant Green, so it's cool. But yeah, I think Grant Green especially, for those guitar players that haven't really checked out a lot of jazz, Grant Green is a great first jazz guitarist, if you will, to get into the sounds of jazz and the swing feel, especially his organ trio stuff. It's very accessible because he, you know, half of his language is blues and then the other half is bebop.
And interestingly, certainly Wes, Kenny, Grant Green, Pat Martino, George Benson, they
Yeah.
all did that organ trio soul jazz stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Which was largely 1-4-5 stuff, blues,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
And there's a question we'll answer in
Okay.
a moment about where should a blues player, where should he start? This is a good place to start, isn't
Grant
it?
Green. Yeah.
Okay,
And anything by Grant Green is good.
there you go.
Sean, I got another track, but I'm not sure what happened with the first one. Let's listen to this one.
Okay, we'll check it out.
Minor, if this is the B flat.
Okay. Yeah,
That's not it, I guess.
that's not it. It doesn't. Yeah.
Try another one. We could
It'd be
go
the C
keep
minor
talking
blues.
about
We-
Grant Green.
yeah.
We're live from TrueFire. It happens, okay?
Sorry, man.
We just proved that this is live, not pre-recorded.
Yeah. It's all good. I mean, Grant Green he was very much influenced by Charlie Christian, but other than that, he didn't listen to a whole lot of guitar players. His bebop vocabulary was very much informed by horn players.
Yeah.
And he was the house guitarist for a while for Blue Note Records.
Right.
So he was very prolific. I mean, he really is almost like the Beatles. His career was a relatively short amount of time, but he was so prolific in those years. So there's so much Grant Green to check out. And organ trio is great because, as you mentioned, that was very much in vogue in the 60s, with Jimmy Smith's groups and, Don Patterson and Babyface Willette and Big John Patton, all
Jack
of those groups.
McDuff.
Yeah.
All that stuff.
And for many guitar players following that was kind of their outlet of getting their jazz chops together. It certainly was for both Pat Martino and George Benson.
And it was very popular. I mean, it was commercially successful during that period of time, which,
right.
Then it was, I guess, what do they call that? Soft jazz or, just kind of, a platform where really good musicians could make some money.
Yeah, and it's a great instrumentation. Guitar and organs sound great together.
Yeah.
And also just live. I mean, there's just nothing like the sound of a real Hammond organ with a Leslie cabinet. And I play with organ trios a lot. In fact, I've got a gig with an organ trio this next weekend in Denver, and I just love it. It's a huge sound.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, you can cover a lot of ground, and it's an interesting and it's a very it's popular now. I mean, organ trio with Peter Bernstein and Larry Goldings and Bill Stewart. There's lots of great organ trios now.
Let's see if we've got a minor blues.
Yeah,
track
let's see
for
if we
you.
can get it a shot. This is a cool one. Yeah, fun stuff. Really fun to play. It's almost addictive.
Yeah. So, while we have folks online here, by the way, let's see who else has tuned in. I'm always waiting for Antarctica because once Antarctica, seriously, there's a guitar player in Antarctica that tunes into most of these. If they're not watching the Lighthouse or whatever they're doing, that gives us all the continents, all the time zones once we get there. But let's see, Seattle joined us, Boston, New Jersey, Finland, I think we said, Switzerland, Russia, Germany, New York City. Shout out to all your fans around the world, man.
Yeah.
Give them a shout out.
Thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate it. This is a lot of fun. I love this.
You know, and Jerusalem, California.
All right.
I love this. I love the, well, obviously the power of the internet, and
Yeah.
you know, but you know, it's so apparent there's this global community of musicians. Number one, that we talk a universal language. You know,
Absolutely.
even if we don't understand the spoken language, the music communicates. And jazz is very much alive, you know?
I think so, and especially international jazz. I mean, I think the scene overseas is better and broader than it ever has been. But you know, you spoke of the community of musicians, and that's absolutely true. But even to take it a step further, there's this amazing family among guitar players around the world. Just that, you know, guitar players we just have this connection, and we're constantly interested in talking about gear and music and styles and approaches and making a living. But I just love the connection that all guitar players have. It doesn't matter where you're from or what you're doing. There's just always that connection.
You know, and it was true back in the 60s and 70s, my generation. And then a lot of people were attracted to guitar because it was, you know, in vogue and it was the cool thing to do. Today, you know, being a guitar player is not necessarily a cool thing to do. It's not going to make you more popular at school or, you know, more popular
I don't know. I mean, I've read that, you know, there have been some articles,
Yeah.
but in my own experience and from what I've seen, I don't know if I would necessarily agree with that. I think it's an exposure thing more than anything else, because one of my former students at CU Denver went on to run one of the School of Rock, you know, those chains. And boy, once kids, whether it's rock or blues or Queen now is having a resurgence, you know, the Bohemian Rhapsody, they hear that and they play that and they experience it and then they're hooked. And so I see a lot of kids who didn't even know about the guitar. I mean, you're absolutely right, and they're right in what they say, that you don't hear as much guitar on the radio as you did in the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Except for country
That's
music.
for sure. Yeah,
you know.
country being except, but in pop music,
Yeah.
you know, back in the day, like for example, when I was learning guitar in the 80s, you know, Michael Jackson is on the radio and Eddie Van Halen's taking a solo, and there's always that crossover with rock and R&B styles, and that was just, everybody was into that. And what I find these days teaching, you know, 19 to 22-year-olds, is that they didn't grow up with that, and it's certainly not on the radio, it's certainly not a part of pop culture. But once they hear that Led Zeppelin record, that Beatles record, that B.B. King live at Cook County Jail record, that same flame is lit like it was for us.
Yeah.
You know? So it's just the challenge is to kind of break through contemporary pop culture and get them to the good stuff.
You know, it's just kind of a waiting game. Everything goes round in cycles, you know. And for all we know, jazz may become the most popular, commercially successful form of
I won't
music.
hold my breath on that one, but I do agree that the guitar is still the coolest
Well, at
instrument.
the very least, we can do what we can do to keep the thing alive. And, you know, speaking on behalf of our student body, the jazzers in our student body, it is very much alive, you know?
Nice.
And, you know, we'll keep doing what we're doing till it does become commercially successful, right? And popular music again. Okay, Madrid, Mexico City, Palm Springs, Arkansas, Asheville, Mumbai, and Nigeria have just tuned in or shouted out.
Hello, how you doing? Thanks for joining us.
Come on, isn't that crazy, man?
It's crazy. It's crazy awesome. Yeah, thank you for tuning in. It's really great.
So that was Views of the Blues. And, you know, there were some shout outs, do Benson, do this one, do that one. And we were talking today about, you know, this is a really interesting series that has a lot of legs.
Yeah.
We can take this much further and cover a lot more players and, you know, acknowledge and, you know, kind of pay forward what they brought to the musical vocabulary.
Yeah, yeah.
So on camera, live, you willing to keep doing this kind of stuff?
Oh, absolutely. And I have to say, I feel very honored to be a part of this process, because what you find when you do this and you really check it out is that you recognize that it's all part of one big tree, you know. Their styles weren't created out of a vacuum, you know, so we can look at Charlie Christian and see how, in this course, how he directly made an impact on the styles of Wes Montgomery, Kenny Burrell, and Grant Green, yet all three of those guitarists had such, you know, incredibly personal immediately recognizable styles. And I think the same was true of the next generation that you just spoke of, Pat Martino, George Benson. And we can point out, especially in earlier recordings, you can look at a place in Pat Martino's playing and say, that is 100% taken from Wes Montgomery, and that is 100%, if you listen to George Benson, I could point out, maybe this is another course, but we could say, this is Grant Green, and this is Kenny Burrell, and I think it's important when forming your own style that you recognize that everybody goes through that period of really assimilating the language of their heroes, and it's all like this giant family. And of course, Pat Martino and George Benson have incredibly unique, innovative styles, but they didn't start from nowhere. They started from assimilating all those influences, recognizing them, and being faithful to them too. In Benson's case, he was also influenced by Hank Garland, a great country Nashville studio guitarist who also was an incredible jazz player, Thornell Schwartz, all these other, and you basically take what you can from these players and ultimately put all of those things together to create your own style. It's pretty fun.
So I think that would be very well received, even based on the comments we're seeing here. Ready for a couple of questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Please.
From, boy, I don't want to mispronounce this gentleman's name, but the question is, any advice to a pentatonic blues player who wants to learn to play jazz guitar? Where and how to start?
Well, a good place to start would be this course, Views of the Blues, and I say that truly because this course was really designed for players such as yourself in mind. How to, there are lots of players that want to get into playing jazz and they don't even know where to begin, and maybe you can buy a real book or something like that, but that's not going to really do much to get things started. I think what you need to do is engage in the music. By listening to it, by if there's any jazz in your, where you live, if there are any jazz clubs there, jazz radio, jazz programs on public radio, start tuning those things. I mean, you can stream anything, so there certainly won't be any challenge in listening to jazz like there was when I was young, growing up in rural Maine, But that would be number one, is listening deeply and listening to maybe just a few different recordings, one or two players. I think these 4 players are great ones to start with, but just kind of keeping limitations on you because you're not overwhelmed by, the entire history of jazz and all of the subgenres. Just focus in on one part of it and take it one piece at a time. And then ultimately the best thing to do is play with other musicians. But I think this course, the intention behind this course was really to expose people that haven't played jazz to the elements of jazz expressed in a blues form, so that there's that common language. So yeah, if you're a pentatonic player, but you know how to play the blues, that's a great starting place. And from the vocabulary that you already have, now you can see a little something different that those 4 players did, and then you can add that, and you're just adding to your playing one piece at a time. And before you know it, you're playing a jazz blues.
There you go. And blues, it's the roots of jazz.
Absolutely. It should be, modern jazz can mean a lot of different things now, but I think, when Marsalis said that it's like the roux in a gumbo. If it doesn't have roux in it, it's not a gumbo. And to him and my personal feeling is that blues has to be somewhere at the core of any jazz that you play. Even if you're playing a standard or a ballad or anything, there's that feeling, certainly the vocabulary and that approach that really ties it all together.
Great answer. And by the way, that gentleman whose name I couldn't pronounce chimed in and said, just call me Al.
All right, Al.
So Al, I hope we answered that question.
Yeah.
Another question from Roger Barreto is,
hey, Roger.
Related to fingerstyle jazz or fingerstyle in general, how important is it for me to learn lead guitar techniques like mode, sweep picking, tremolo for fingerstyle guitar?
That's an interesting question. I think ultimately the answer to that question you would have to figure out, and because that's based on what do you want to play. The way that I always thought about it, if there was a technique, whether I saw somebody live or listened to a record and had to imagine what they did, that was really exciting for me, and launched we were just talking earlier in the day about imagination, and that's really important. If you're only listening to a recording of something, trying to imagine how a player articulated something, you know. But ultimately, you'll answer those questions for yourself. I would just say, if you like the sound of sweep picking, then learn how to sweep pick. You know, I don't think you should do anything because you should do it. It should be because you want to do it. But the desire will come from listening to players such as Charlie Christian, and when you hear him do a line like, and just kind of that raking sound, then you say, "Huh, how's he doing that? I know he's not articulate, he's not alternate picking something like that." And that's usually the impetus to learning a new technique. So I would say, if you're attracted to a sound, Roger, just figure out a way to learn it, whether you learn it specifically through video instruction or live instruction, or just imagine how that's articulated, and then you might come up with a technique on your own.
Yeah, I remember Larry Carlton talking about the first time he heard Eddie Van Halen, do that tapping thing,
right?
And he thought it was something done in the studio. He couldn't, but he loved the sound of it.
Yeah.
And went crazy trying to figure out, and ultimately did.
Right.
So that's pretty much what you're saying as well. Another question: do we need to learn this from Rob Byron? Lots of difficult chords.
Define difficult.
Right.
I'm just kidding. No, the short answer is no. And if I might mention a course that I did that addresses that question for TrueFire called Creative Jazz Comping. And the very first lesson in that course is designed to make learning chords easy and very accessible, because I'm a big believer in that. Music shouldn't be complicated. I think Joe Pass said jazz shouldn't sound hard. It shouldn't sound like that. I mean, the goal is to make anything, quote unquote, difficult sound and look and feel easy. No one wants to listen to hard music, So I think one of the approaches that we talk about in this Creative Jazz Comping course is how to simplify chord voicings and learn how they work in terms of the colors that are available over the foundation notes of any chord voicing. And that first concept in that course, you can pretty much learn anywhere chord voicing in about a week. And I know that sounds maybe a little salesman-ish, but it's really true. Nothing bugs me more than those chord books that are like, here are 5 million chords, learn them all. And well, how are you supposed to do that? I mean, unless you have a photographic memory. That approach never worked for me. So when I really worked on increasing my chord vocabulary, I was really focused on understanding the function of each of the notes in the chord. So I thought more like an arranger rather than a guitar player trying to memorize all these shapes, because I don't have a good memory. I just would forget them all. So this course you might like, because it unravels a lot of those mysteries.
It does. It's a great course.
Yeah.
And another 5-star ranked course from you. From Burton Guster, do you suggest learning full choruses of a solo or just a few licks?
I think that you can get a lot done by learning a few licks, I mean, I transcribing a full course, of course, the more the better, but that's an arduous task. Although I think it's, that's blood, sweat, and tears, if you want to get down to it. And having said that, I think if you transcribe just a handful of full choruses, there's enough material there that will influence your playing for not only years, but decades, I look back at all of these solos that I transcribed when I was 19, 20, and those still pop up in my playing. So that's a great way. I think it's still the best way to go deep, is just get down there, get your ears on it, and really, you don't have to write it out necessarily. In fact, I'd recommend not doing that initially, so you can just get the feel. Rhythm is often overlooked when people are transcribing, they just, and getting back to that earlier question, I think from Roger, that was about scales and modes and things like that. Don't worry about all of that. Of course, you need to know how things fit together theoretically. But, for example, people said, well, Wes Montgomery didn't know how to read music and he didn't understand theory. And, the theory part I would argue with, because I think he had his own understanding of theory and had that organized in an incredible way on the fretboard. He could access any sound that he wanted to. So, transcribing a few licks here and there, that's a really important thing, and getting the feel so you can play along with a recording to get those articulations, to get the vibe. You may have noticed in that Grant Green piece that I just played, a lot of it is really laid back behind the beat, and that's an important part of his playing. So it's more than just the pitches, it's really the feel and their phrasing, and the only way to really capture that is by playing along with the record. And that's why learning it by ear oftentimes is more powerful than just getting a book and learning the notes on the page. That will give you one side of the story, but the rhythm is an even more important part of the story, I feel.
That's a really great point you made about everyone does know theory. It could be their own theory. Doesn't need to be book or formal theory. You don't need to know all the modes of all the modes to be able to play jazz, right?
Right.
So Henry Johnson, who is also a TrueFire artist, and very successful courses he's done here, and a great player. You know Henry by any chance?
Yes, great, wonderful
He
player.
has his own theory.
Wonderful.
He calls them areas. He looks at the fretboard as areas of activity, and he definitely has plotted out how he approaches a guitar in a theoretical way.
Yeah.
Pat Martino has his sacred geometry, and not exactly formal, established, traditional theory.
Right.
So you made a really good point there.
Yeah.
We're running out of time. We've got still a ton of people tuned in. Let's talk about trading solos.
Sure.
So I would ask you, first of all, do you think that jamming with other players is an important thing for a musician to do?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, one of the many reasons why players are so attracted to these trading solos courses is that you feel like you're a part of something, even though it's not in real time. It's so much more enjoyable than just practicing by yourself or playing with a metronome. The tools that you have available now as a developing player are just mind-boggling, and a lot more interesting, and I think a lot more impactful. So trading solos is on a number of levels. It can be just therapy, playing along with somebody else, but it's really nice to be able to, so for example, in this course, I spell out some concepts, some ideas that you can use, and that's something that you can spontaneously make happen while we're trading throughout the course. And it's also something that you can go and work on. Say, wow, I never really thought about it that way. What if I sat down and wrote out some lines or some licks or something in my music notebook? And then you can turn on the course whenever you want, And that's one of the great things about having this course at your disposal is that you can play through it and then say, what, I need to work on this. I need to get some more voicings happening, or I really want to check out the idea that's presented in this tune, and then practice it for a couple of weeks, and then come back to it, and then you can play along in real time and get that idea to fruition, where that necessarily wouldn't happen as immediately if you were just going to the monthly jam session in town. Although I think that the Trading Solos courses are a great bridge to making that happen if that's your own personal goal, to go to a jazz jam session and actually sit in with strangers, musicians that you don't know, and call a standard, call a blues, call a ballad, and then just go for it. That's where a lot of incredible learning can happen on the bandstand. And I think these Trading Solos courses are incredible, prep. It's like boot camp, to get you ready for that, without any of the anxiety or nervousness that would come from playing something unfamiliar in front of a live audience or with other musicians. So these courses are great.
So, as you said, whether you just want to come home after work and play along and have some fun, you could do that. But Sean does share some moves, some concepts, some approaches, both for soloing, improvisation, and comping, right?
Yep.
And then you trade solos. And while Sean is soloing, you're comping. While you're soloing, Sean will comp for you.
Yeah.
And you'll pick up a lot of stuff along the way. And what I'd like to do, if you're cool with it, let's roll a track.
Sure.
You solo for a chorus, then you comp. Then, let them live, if you've got a guitar in your lap.
Yeah.
Do this. So grab your guitars, get ready. What track do you want to do this for?
Let's see. Well, actually, We probably only have time for one. So, Tommy, is it cool to do the lunar track? Do you have that handy? Because this is a shorter. This is a 12-bar form, like a blues, but it's a variation, and this is a standard that a lot of people like to play. But yeah, to reiterate what you were just saying, these courses have 5 tunes, 5 based on standard progressions. In my course, we talk about a couple of medium tempo swings. There's a up tempo piece. There's a ballad, and one of them is in straight eighths. And for each song, for each chord progression, we talk about a variety of concepts for both comping and soloing. So the tracks are designed to just be bass and drums, and so there's nothing else to clutter up. So when I solo, you get to comp and try to check out those voicings and rhythmic ideas and so forth. And then I take the next chorus and comp, and then you solo, and so on and so on. It's a lot of fun.
Mimic it.
Oh. Sorry, I think we're wrong track. But can we do the lunar? Got it. All right, here we go. Here's just a taste. Your turn to solo.
Nice. So a great example of what that course is about.
Yeah,
And
it's a lot of fun.
As you can tell, you could just sit down, play along, or, drill deep, pick up on the concepts that you share with them, and cop a few of your comping moves or...
Yeah, and everything's in tab, everything's in standard notation, there's charts for everything, so, everything that we present in these courses, you'll have access to in terms of the PDF handouts that you can print off.
So I would say, Sean, that between these 2 courses, probably a good 2-3 years worth of practice
couple of weeks,
and
maybe.
shed time, right?
Yeah, unless you're in Antarctica, then you practicing all the time. Yeah, you get.
But what's great, and look, a lot of our students do this, myself included. Cherry pick what you like.
Yeah.
Just pick out 1 or 2 things,
right.
And and take those to your next band practice or jam session, and
that's right.
That's okay too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the way that I've learned over the years. Whether it was a book or a solo that I learned, they were just things that I didn't understand, and that was okay. I just accepted that, saying I have no idea what they're doing. And years later, sometimes many years later, I would finally understand and say, "Wow, okay, I get it now." It's almost like this thing has been in your life, and now all of a sudden you have a completely different idea of what that represents and means. And that's changing, but it's okay. And that's one of the things that I really like about these courses and jazz in general is that you'll get a lot of mileage from this. You might get into one thing and then you're not ready for this one concept or line, and you'll get to that later. And that's all part of the development.
2 more questions. We're running out of time. Then we're going to do a gear rundown.
All
okay?
right, gear.
So your answers have to be 5 words or less.
Okay.
Deal?
All right, I'll try.
From Marcelo, what is the secret of playing without thinking about using scales and theory? 5 words or less.
Set it and forget it.
Oh, that's good. That's a good one.
Yeah, that's an important question, and it's a long answer, but knowing it, but then forgetting about it. And I know that sounds cliche, but yes, it's important to recognize a scale and mode, but the application is more important, and to ultimately recognize that as a set of sounds. And these courses go a long way in helping that, kind of, getting away from running scales when you play changes and focusing on creating languages.
Great answer. A little more than 5 words,
All
but
right, I'll
acceptable.
try, maybe 10.
Okay. From Marcus Noel, what about 4-note chord inversions? How important are they for jazz comping vocabulary and chord melody vocabulary?
I would say for chord melody, pretty important, and mostly because you want to be able to support the melody of a song with different inversions, and the melody is more than 1 or 2 notes. So if you're going to support a 7-note melody or a 6-note melody, it's nice to have a few inversions. But so, I would say it in a non-taskmaster way. Just take your time and learn those inversions, but in a creative way. And what I mean by that is don't just memorize them by rote, just like, ugh, this is awful, and then, what's with my phone? Think about, like, maybe just take one of those inversions and then create a little exercise, maybe. And then jam with it, and that's what these courses are all about. Just getting them happening. Put on a metronome, put on a backing track, put on a TrueFire course, and just get it happening. Now I'm having fun, and when you have fun learning something, then you learn it on a deeper level.
Cool. And knowing the inversions gives you a different melody note on top.
That's right.
That's why you would use.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gear rundown.
Gear.
Tell us about that guitar.
This is a guitar that I've had for a long time. This is a 1968 Gibson Es-340, very similar to a 335. I think it's a little heavier. My back is killing me now, but it's got a big, thick, chunky neck on it. This guitar is great for not only jazz, but blues and rock. I mean, it's just got these screaming humbuckers in there, so you can get like a ZZ Top
Hold
sound.
it up so they can see the thickness too.
Yeah. Oh, so there's the.
It's kind of thin.
Yeah. It's a big chunky neck, and it's a little thinner this way. So honestly, I haven't played this guitar a whole lot recently. I primarily play arch tops, larger, 17-inch. Thicker, and I prefer those guitars for fingerstyle mostly because on Gibsons the strings are closer together. So I've been really trying to practice on this because I haven't played this guitar in many years.
Many of your guitars don't have fret markers.
That's
either.
why I'm playing this guitar. Honestly, it's been so long since I played a guitar with dots on it that it was throwing me off a little bit. I was going to the wrong place. But yes. TrueFire lovers, I am using a guitar with dots, so you can see exactly where I am.
Exactly.
Yeah. So.
And we appreciate that. We really do.
Yeah.
Man.
No. Of course. But I think that this guitar also really captures, Grant Green's sound. Of course, his early recordings are with an ES-330 with P90s, but at least you can get closer to that sound. Even though this has humbuckers, you can get closer to that sound using a guitar like this. And then the other guitar that I'm using in the 3 Views course is a borrowed arch top.
Can you swap them out?
Yeah. So some of these songs I wanted a box, and you can see that we installed some dots, some paper dots.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah, this is my friend's Eastman, and he
Nice
had the
job.
repair guys in his shop
That is a beautiful
put some dots
guitar.
on.
That's an Eastman guitar?
This is an Eastman John Pisano model,
Yeah.
and I borrowed this for the shoot because I really wanted to get closer to a Kenny Burrell and Wes Montgomery, especially their sounds. I wanted a thicker box, a wider box with heavier flat wounds on it. So this has heavier strings. Normally I play 12s on my arch top, but I think that you have to find the right gauge or the right sound for each of your guitars, But yeah, they all create, you know, a slightly different sound. I think if you're really into straight ahead jazz, it's a great idea to pick up one of these. And these Eastman guitars, they're great. They're a bargain. This is, you know, the John Pisano model, as I mentioned, and compared to the archtops that were available when I was growing up, they're super affordable.
Oh yeah, Eastman makes a great guitar. We have several of them
Yeah,
here as well.
yeah, it's great. Sounds great.
And usually when you're gigging out, what do you use for an amp?
I use pretty much exclusively these amps that are built by a friend of mine in Denver, Colorado. They're called Henriksen amps. Peter Henriksen is the CEO and the president of that company. And I've known Peter since I moved to Denver 11 years ago, and he and his dad, Bud Henriksen, were just getting this business going. Bud Henriksen was a brilliant engineer, retired, and also a great jazz guitarist who was just literally frustrated with all the amps on the market, and amps breaking down, tube amps not working, and all of these things. So he came up with just a great design for a circuit that has been elaborated upon and improved upon several times. And so right now I'm playing through the Henriksen Blue amp, which you can't see it, but it's literally about the size of a jug of milk. It's this big, weighs nothing, which is very practical for playing jazz gigs because, you know, many of those gigs you have to, you know, climb upstairs or you're not on a big stage. You certainly don't have roadies working for you, so it's like one trip in and out. But I need something that's a nice, clean platform, but it also has a little bit of a vibe. It's not sterile sounding.
Actually, Tommy was able to get a shot of it. It's
cool,
it's
yeah.
little, compact, easy
Yeah, so
to
there's the
travel
mic,
with.
you know, there's my hand, and all I'm using, you know, all I pretty much use for effects is a nice reverb, maybe occasionally a delay, but reverb is very important because I think if that's all you're going to use, then I spend my money in cables and reverb.
Right.
So I have a bunch of reverb pedals, and the one that I'm using right now is this fairly new faux spring reverb by Wampler. It's the mini spring reverb, and man, it sounds great. It's just you know, it's got a nice tail on it that you don't really notice when you're playing. So when you're playing, I think because, you know, jazz involves playing a lot of notes sometimes, it's very complicated that you don't want to be swimming in reverb.
Right.
So I like just a nice, you know, plate or a spring reverb sound. I have a bunch of different pedals, but this Wampler is really great, and it works well, and it will also allow you to cut through the mix if you're playing with a loud drummer or with an organ. And I think also it's important to have a good quality cable. You know, I actually read an interview with Kenny Burrell, and he was talking about that. It's really important to have the entire expansiveness of your sound through your guitar to be represented through the cable. So you don't want to have a cable that cuts out any of that high end.
So what cable are you using?
I use a bunch right now. I'm using these are Zayola cables, which are expensive cables, but
How expensive?
oh, let's see. I think I'm trying to remember. I think the 10-foot is like $150 bucks.
That's pricey.
It's pricey, but you know what? I never have to worry about it. It sounds good. That's the price of a pedal, and I only have one pedal, though, so
Right.
I don't mind spending that. I also use cables made by a friend of mine in Colorado called Audio Envy cables, and you know, it's really I don't think it makes any sense to me to cheap out on a cable. I mean, if you're investing a lot of money in your amp and in your guitar, the cable is what's holding that together. And, you know, a lot of people don't hear the difference, especially in a loud bar, but trust me, it does make a difference on the clarity of your chords. And, you know, I like having a cable that's solid and reliable and will, especially when I play solo guitar, it's very important to have that clarity there.
Very cool, man. Listen, thank you for carving out the time to do this. I know you have a little more work on your course.
Yeah.
We ran, I don't know, 20 minutes over, but people were eager.
Still here, okay. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you being here and your questions. Thank you so much.
As do all of us from TrueFire, and perhaps you'd care to just play a little solo piece as an outro.
Sure. Let's see.